Talk to us about why you're running and why you would like to replace a congressman.
Okay. My name's Keith Neuendorff, and I'm running for the U.S. Congress in the 25th District for Texas. I initially got, interested in the race because of my experience with Roger Williams as my congressman. And I was basically dissatisfied in his performance in office and his lack of connectivity with his constituents. As I had a particularly, I'll call it a bad experience trying to talk to his staff and connect him on several issues over the last few years. And I found out that a lot of other people were having a similar experience with him. And then upon further looking into him, his issues, I found that I had several policy differences with him on several issues, particularly on education. And I thought that the district needed a better alternative in the Republican primary. He had run unopposed the last couple of times in the primary and has a relatively safe district. And I thought that, again, that it would be a good idea to have a choice at the primary level among candidates, someone offering an alternative to what I consider some of his more extreme views. So that's what got me to the point of I wanted to have an alternative. I talked with a number of people about that, and I ended up getting to the point where I said that me running was the right way to go.
Catch up on the bad experience dealing with him or the office.
Yes.
Can you give us an idea of the nature of that kind of thing? Was it
okay, well,
what was your business you were trying to, you don't have to get too specific.
Well, I was talking about some of the accountability on there was some initial investigation of what had happened on the impeachment inquiry, or the very initial stages of it, and encouraging him to look into it. I felt that the House of Representatives and all the members of the House needed to live up to the responsibilities of just oversight and just some basic encouragements. I got a lot of, and that was one of them, but there were some previous specific policy issues from previous years. And all of the interactions I had, I got the initial form letter from the congressman, and to be expected maybe, but then following up additional times with his offices, I got very limited responses from them in any meaningful ways, and trying to interact more with the congressman. It was always like, we don't have access to his schedule, we can't do anything for you on that, just check Facebook, was kind of the response. So can be very frustrating.
So, I mean, would you have accepted just an answer if they'd given you one that no, the congressman believes this is not?
Yes, something.
Or it's the Congress's time, or whatever it might be.
It would have been much better than what I got from them, because it was more of a avoidance issue. So anyway, that's what got me into the race, and I found that a number of people have been very supportive. Great number of people that I talked to in person and through various online fundraising and connecting with people, that a lot of people feel similar, and they want to have an alternative choice out there. And there are a lot of people there's a variety of opinions. If you talk to 10 constituents in the district, you'll get 15 opinions probably. But it's been great actually talking to people out in the district. It's been renewing my faith in humanity in a way, is because people actually do want to engage in conversations and not be so polarized. So I think there's a place for this kind of candidacy and having different kinds of discussions.
You mentioned policy differences with
Yes.
congressmen. Could you be specific about some of those?
Sure.
So where are you different?
Yeah, and kind of the broad category, you could think of it as, investment in certain areas of the government. Congressman Williams has said in various interviews and speeches that he wants to get rid of large portions of the government, particularly the Department of Education, Energy and Commerce. And education is the one that's easier to explain to people, I believe, and it's one that I care about very much. I have 5 kids. The age range from 24 down to 6. So I've gone through the ringer with getting kids in college or going through K-12, education, all the issues that families deal with. And I have a 6-year-old still, so I'm getting back in the cycle again, actually. But that's really informed me about what's important. And as a foundation, excuse me, education is really a foundation of all of many other parts of society that we have. And I think that we need to really support that at all levels of government, and that we actually, federal, state, and local, all need to roll up their sleeves and not abdicate responsibility for that. We've all got a part to play in that. And Congressman Williams has said he wants to get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of a lot of the programs that are there, and I don't think that that is a wise decision. It's very short-sighted. And I don't think it's actually a realistic position either, because sometimes he says it's in the name of balancing the budget. I don't think the numbers match up for getting rid of all of those parts of the government. And I don't think they're a realistic position, because a lot of those programs, even if you pared them down to a more bare bones state, you still have a lot of programs that are very important, add a lot of value. So I don't think that using that as a reason or a way to balance the budget is not the way to go. But also I think we need to build out infrastructure and energy, for instance, and the Commerce Department does a lot of important work too for us.
Could you talk about what you consider the most important piece of legislation that Congress could or should pass next year, and why?
Really the biggest thing that we need to address, which ties in with fiscal responsibility and several other areas, is about reform, some additional reforms to health care, about locking in a true, true pre-existing conditions law, so that we have a balanced approach with that. Pre-existing conditions, no one's refused insurance for that, and then they all pay the same. Not there's some other proposals about it, pre-existing conditions that I don't think meet that standard. But also we need to really start addressing the underlying way we deliver health care, because if you're talking about balancing the budget, dealing with health, you have to deal with health care. That's the real problem there. And for instance, moving to a pay for outcomes versus fee for service approach would be a good start, providing an option where people can get that, but not trying to tear down the rest of the system either. Putting something in parallel, giving people choice, and letting it over time, the better choice win out. But I think that's the biggest foundational thing that the federal government could do, is deal in a meaningful way with healthcare.
So of the various big picture healthcare schemes, from the pre-Obamacare, generally privately run system with some government programs, to
all the way to
Obamacare, to single payer, like where do you, which general model do you favor?
The baseline model is going to be, that I would favor, is something very close to Obamacare is, and I think there are a few shortcomings of it, but as we found out, it got put in place. The basically Republican-controlled Congress had a chance to deal with it or make adjustments to it, and they could not come to an agreement on it with something better. So I think that is the baseline model. I'm not in favor of a full Medicare for all, where the extreme is Medicare for all and then private insurance goes away completely. It's a very difficult sell. It's extremely expensive. And it also, getting rid of private insurance, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to go back if it is a failure. We need transitional steps in whatever we do in healthcare.
If we could talk about your thoughts on border security and immigration reform.
Mm-hmm. So on border security, broad strokes, yes, I believe we do need a strong border. I don't have any agreement with that. I do think, though, that our expenditures on border security should be more in lines with dealing with ports of entry. That the different parts of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs that have reported on this say, okay, our problems with illegal entry and illegal drugs coming into the United States are centered around ports of entry, and that we need to actually just look at the data, basic data, and say, okay, well, let's concentrate our resources. Yes, we can spend more money on that, concentrate our resources there, but also in the spaces in between. There are some people that say, well, we have to control that section too. Yes, that makes sense, but we can do some other smarter approaches to observing and enhancing the Border Patrol, but do it in a way that's appropriate to the level of the issue is in those locations. But we don't need a full, do we need a full barrier across the whole southern border? No. We can do it in a lot more cost-effective way that actually provides better outcomes. And also one of the things about that is, putting full barriers in place on the southern border actually is expropriating land from the people that live down there too. That is, I take that very seriously. That people, if we have to confiscate land from people to put in additional anything, we need to take our time and make a very serious decision about if that's the right thing to do.
We've also been asking candidates about their positions on gun violence and reforms, and how far would you go in that area, realizing that, of course, we need to protect the Second Amendment, I guess.
Yes, right. I support the Second Amendment, specifically responsible gun ownership, and that is, I think we could enhance that by broadening some of the existing categories of people that are restricted from having guns, and that specifically, the boyfriend loophole and some other mental illness categories can be broadened that actually can reduce some gun violence.
Let's talk a little more about what you mean with the mental health piece of it. How would that intersect with gun violence? And
there's a tight restrictions. It's very narrowly drawn about who is restricted from with certain diagnoses, and about that someone who has had issues but didn't go through a formal diagnosis process. There needs to be a better way to address that, to basically narrow it down to people that had certain predispositions or have been identified that they have some issues, that we need to be able to restrict their gun ownership.
Okay. Or what about red flag laws?
Basically in that area, if you're talking about people that are which specifically are you talking about?
The proposal that there could be a law in place that if someone has raised concern that you might be threatening them or threatening
Right.
yourself,
Okay. Yes.
They could temporarily take the gun while kind of sorting it out.
Yes. The hesitation about taking away a person's guns. That's I have hesitation about that. It's more difficult, but the acquisition, again, broadening the existing categories of people that acquire guns, yes.
We've talked about a few issues, healthcare access, gun reforms, and border security, immigration. But I'm curious what you're hearing as you campaign, what people are talking about, what are they worried about?
The biggest issues are, actually the issue I think that gets the most traction is talking about accountability. There's a number of people that, it's maybe self-fulfilling. I'm going out and talking about accountability, and I attract certain people that want to talk about accountability. But I think, leveling it out, it's really about a little bit of it's healthcare, and the cost of doing business for small businesses has been a big issue. I had a great discussion with a business owner in Lampasas that was talking about the difficulties of running a small business and about the overhead costs and the risk that's involved in it. And part of that is healthcare too. It does tie in with healthcare, but just not having too many. About taxation levels he's concerned about, and wage laws, about how he can afford to, especially in a town like Lampasas, is very low cost, and how he can afford to hire more employees to expand his business. Those are some of the big issues that are coming in. Healthcare and small businesses viability are the issues that are coming up quite a bit.
You've said that you're part of a movement in the party to
Yes.
get back to core principles,
Right.
as you called them. and to position the party to be a conservative voice.
Yes.
I wonder if you could elaborate on that. What do you
Clarify that a bit?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yes, it's going back. So a lot of people.
How has the party disappointed you, I guess?
I answered this for some in the media. I can't remember which one it was. It's all blurred. Talking to like it seems like 1 million people now. But it's about, I used to, I felt like the Republican Party was kind of a sensible party. It's like, okay, let's look at the facts of what we have in front of us, and let's make a decision. Let's be frugal with our money and make good decisions about it. And it feels like we've gotten away from that. It basically kind of a fiscal responsibility argument. There is, we, as a Republican Party or as a conservative voice or conservative party, we need to actually stand up for like, okay, let's work toward getting a balanced budget and working within our resources and actually looking toward the future. What's a good investment? What's a smart investment that's cost effective? Be very cautious about making those investments, but let's keep our house in order. And I feel like we've gotten away from that. But then on top of that, I think we also need to have I think in some of my campaign materials it says about yelling less. We need to have we can have a conservative party and a conservative voice, but we don't need to demean each other as much, and actually have engagement across all of society, pulling people in and actually solving problems. That's what I think. Being fiscally responsible and getting in, digging in, solving real problems is what the Republican Party and the conservative voice should be about. And I feel like we've gotten away from that.
So as you travel the district,
yes.
There are probably pockets or probably large swatches that are really strong Trump supporters. Like,
yes.
How do they react to that message? What are you hearing from that group?
I have been. There's disagreement, yes, but there's also very civil conversation, and I've been pleasantly surprised because going up to there's a lot of places farther north and in the middle of the district that are more conservative, but they've done lots of good discussions about that, and I've made a pitch for education actually really gets traction with people, because it's like, hey, we want to, people believe in being conservative, smaller government, being very cautious with spending federal money and wanting lower taxes. But they also, those people, and often are Trump supporters, also believe in supporting education at a local level and light touch from the federal government. When I engage them in a conversation about education, I say, okay, well, the federal government only provides 8% of educational funding through the Department of Education. They're surprised about that, and they say, okay, well, what is, we talk about, okay, it's funding for poorer school districts and STEM education and teachers, a few other things, and even people that are very conservative and Trump supporters like that and say, well, that's not a bad idea. They didn't know it as much. They didn't really know that was the case, and we have that discussion, and we can come together and actually agree.
You had mentioned the accountability and the you were thinking there was something to investigate in the impeachment inquiry. You
Yes.
started all this. Mm-hmm. So if you'd been in Congress, remember it was right before Christmas.
Yeah.
Would you have voted for or against the 2 articles of impeachment?
And I guess I have the pleasant benefit of not having to actually vote for them. But I think that the bigger issue is one of the disagreements that I had with Roger Williams was about that Congress has the responsibility to actually hold the executive branch accountable, and to just do basic checking and oversight on what the executive branch is doing. And there was a large movement among the Republicans to say, there's nothing to see here. We don't need to look at this at all. And that was the biggest disappointment I had, because I'm in favor of, we were coming up on election, we're going to decide it, even though we went through the impeachment and the Senate trial is about to wrap up today, we're there anyway. we're going to get it decided by an election. If you do have a democratic election where people decide was this good or bad, or should we keep the president in place, we need to have information. And I think that the House of Representatives didn't live up to their responsibilities about providing voters information, because they were saying we don't even need to look at this, and there was a lot of information that's very valuable to make a decision. So that was my biggest issue with this whole thing.
So, so it sounds like on that issue you may or may not have crossed the aisle. Are there some others? You mentioned the Obamacare stuff, which would be sort of out of line with a lot in the Republican Party. Are there things like that where you just say, I can't believe that people are just voting in blocks on all these things, and I would be one of those people that I'm willing to be one of the 3 or 4 or whatever it is that stands up and says no? Well,
I believe that it's served if we have all of our congressmen have some independence and thoughtfulness about what they're doing. But I do understand the power of voting as a party or parties. There's a power there, but sometimes you need to stand up for something that's more important. I mean, if you, like what I just said was, basic democracy needs information to function, and if that's not happening, then there's a problem. And then, yes, I would stand up for that.
So where do you? This is like a crazy. I live in this district, and I live.
Oh,
I live 15 miles south of here.
Yeah. Drawing the boundaries.
Where do you live, and what are you? How are you?
How did I get pulled into this?
Well, how are you? What are you hearing from different parts of this district, and how do you go about trying to campaign in something that large and diverse and
that's right? Yes.
Unwieldy?
Yeah, it's very geographically large, and there's a diversity of opinions. I actually can talk to people and have a meaningful conversation all through the district, talking to people about the accountability. They can actually latch onto that fairly easily. Education, especially, but talking about investment, why we need to have investment in to make our country a better place. That includes roads, bridges, infrastructure, energy, and education. Those are very easy to agree on, actually, policies and areas to talk about. And I can draw contrast points between myself and our current congressman. And no matter what your political stripe is, there's a lot of common ground issues that everyone seems very comfortable in talking about. And a lot of, because I've had discussions with people, walked a neighborhood in parts of Austin where someone said, don't even talk to me, I'm a pretty left wing, and I don't let them go that easily. I get into the conversation with them, and if they're willing to talk to me, which they almost always are, then we can actually have a meaningful conversation, and I can learn something, and we can come find some common ground. It works the same way if someone's a very far right side of the political spectrum, and we can get engaged in a conversation and come to many of the same conclusions. And even it's more interesting if you get those two people and me in the same room at the same time, but it takes a little longer to get there, but we often reach the same conclusion anyway.
I assume you find a lot of people who don't even know who their congressman is.
That is correct also. About 40 to 50% of the people that I talk to in this district either don't know who their congressman is at all, or if I say Roger Williams, they say, yes, I think so, to that level. Part of the reason, the way the districts are drawn, I think, is a detriment to knowing that. There's been a lot of, I've talked to people, especially in the Travis and Hayes counties. They say, I think my congressman is, say sometimes Lamar Smith, even, who's been out of office. Or they say, no, I think it's Chip Roy, when it's actually Michael McCall, so there is a issue getting people engaged. It's a barrier for people to get engaged in a discussion.
So with redistricting coming up, which will be done at the state level, but I think it's fair to assume that these sitting members of Congress will have some fingers in drawing their own districts.
Yes,
In the future. Would you basically redistrict, change your district if you were to win?
If I
would you
had
change
my
it in a way that
magic
actually,
wand.
what would it be, and are you willing to do that in a way that might actually be detrimental to your re-election?
I think that I think that the districts should not be drawn, particularly the way Travis County is divided up among the districts is not good for engagement and public discourse, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or whatever, wherever you are on the spectrum. So I think that, and that actually, a lot of people have talked about that. I have a foam board with a map of the district on that I bring around with me everywhere. I put it on an easel, and that's it actually sucks people in. They point and say, well, here's you in this, because I've studied the district at length, the finicky edges of the boundaries, and talk about that. And people say, really, this is needs to be improved upon, at least, to put it that way. Not as radical. I think there is a lot of people calling for it to be, I'll say, not as radically gerrymandered as it is now. And it would help people get more engaged in the process, even whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah, do you live in Travis County, or which part of that?
Yes, I live in Westlake Hills.
So if Travis County were split into two or something like that,
okay.
Something simple like that.
Yes.
And both were going to skew Democratic, and you were the Republican with it. Are you cool with that, or would you?
Yes, I would be willing to live with that. Yeah, that makes things more difficult for me. Yes, I think. Or if it was a choice between having a good improvement in the way the districting is drawn versus making my life more difficult, or leaving it as is and making my life safer, I would choose the more difficult path for myself. But.
I didn't know. Did you watch the State of the Union?
I did. I was I was actually at a campaign event, but we did. I caught the last half of it.
Where was the campaign event?
It was actually in San Marcos. It was a candidate forum.
Okay, because you were talking about how you were pleased that people weren't as polarized in campaigning.
Yes.
But that wasn't really the scene last night.
In the State of the Union address.
Had any take on
yes.
what happened?
No, or in the State of the Union address.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. And I did go. I probably watched about 2/3 of it in real time or on tape delay, but then other highlights too. It was a very base-oriented speech. And I think it would have been more appropriate if it would have been more of a unifying speech, especially as we're wrapping up with the Senate trial. So if you're asking what I would have liked to have in that speech or my evaluation, I think it would have been better for the country to be more unifying. The president could have touched on a lot of his base issues still, but could have been more open and trying to pull people together. I think, but he could have achieved both of those in the same speech, but he did not. So he was too base-oriented, and I think that's a missed opportunity.
So when you saw the speaker ripping it up, were you understanding or appalled?
I was in the middle. I wish she wouldn't have done it. I think it again pushes the discussion in the wrong direction. But also, a handshake at the beginning would have been better. Everybody could have behaved a little bit better, and I think would have moved the discussion and us as a country forward instead of treading water, let's call it.
But as sheer politics on the president's behalf, do you think it's effective?
It does solidify him with his base and the Republican Party, but is that a winning strategy? I guess we're going to find out in November. But it's as pure politics. There's a lot of risk involved in that, but a lot of risk, a lot of reward, I guess. But I don't think it's necessarily the best path forward. And it's pure politics. I see where it's coming from, but I don't necessarily think that that's the best path.
It was a good opportunity to spot Roger at the end.
Yes, I did see him walking out,
He's-
speaking briefly, and then was right behind the president as he was walking out, yes.